I found the recording on a Tuesday, not because I was snooping, not because I had any suspicion at all. I found it because my phone had been set to automatically back up to the cloud, something my son-in-law Joel had set up for me about 8 months earlier. "It'll save your photos, Dad," he said, patting me on the shoulder like I was some kind of old dog who needed help crossing the street. I thanked him. I meant it. So when I opened my tablet that Tuesday morning to look at some old vacation photos from a trip my wife Cecile and I had taken to Asheville, I wasn't looking for anything. I was just a 58-year-old man sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, missing the Blue Ridge Mountains. Instead, I found a video, 43 seconds long, shot sideways the way people do when they don't realize they're recording. My bedroom. My nightstand with the water glass I keep there. My wife's reading lamp. And sounds I will not describe in detail except to say that they left absolutely no room for misunderstanding. The coffee went cold. I sat there for I don't know how long. The refrigerator hummed. A truck went by outside. Normal Tuesday sounds from a world that had just tilted completely off its axis. The video was from a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks prior. I had been at a licensing renewal seminar for my real estate broker certification, 6 hours in a hotel conference room in downtown Columbus. Cecile had told me she was getting her hair done and then meeting her friend Donna for lunch. I had believed her because I had been believing her for 31 years. Joel was our daughter Natalie's husband. They had been married for 4 years. He was 34. Cecile was 56. I put my tablet face down on the table and walked to the backyard. I stood there in the grass in my socks for a long time. There was a cardinal in the oak tree. It just sat there, red as a stop sign, staring at me. I went back inside and watched the video again. Then I did something I want to be very clear about. I did not panic. I did not call anyone. I did not confront Cecile, who was upstairs in our bathroom getting ready for her Tuesday Pilates class like nothing in the universe had changed. I went to the junk drawer in the kitchen, found the small recording device I had bought 2 years ago to record client calls, perfectly legal in Ohio, as long as one party to the conversation consents, and I was about to become that party. And I put it in my shirt pocket. Then I made a second cup of coffee and waited. She came downstairs at 9:15 in her workout clothes, ponytail, the little diamond earrings I had given her for our 25th anniversary. She kissed me on the cheek, told me the weather app said it might rain by afternoon. "Have a good class," I said. She left. I sat down and started making a list. Here is what I knew. I had a 43-second video that would make any divorce attorney's job extremely simple. What I did not have was any idea of how long this had been going on, whether Natalie knew, or how deep the whole thing went. Real estate had taught me one thing above all else: never make a move until you understand the full property. I called my brother Warren that afternoon, not to tell him everything, just to give him enough. Warren is 62, retired from the fire department, and the most practically calm person I have ever known. I told him I had discovered something serious about Cecile and that I needed him on standby for the next few weeks. He asked one question: "You need a place to stay or just backup?" I told him backup for now. He said, "Okay, I'm here." That was the only person I told. Over the next 9 days, I gathered information quietly. I found 3 more videos in the cloud backup. I found a pattern: Wednesday afternoons, always when I had something scheduled, always at our house. The most recent one was 11 days before I found them, meaning this had been going on for at least 2 months that I could document, probably longer. I transferred everything to a thumb drive and put it in the lockbox at my office. I called my attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, who had handled 2 of my commercial property closings. He did not do family law himself, but referred me to a colleague, a woman named Constance Webb, who had an office on the north side. I met with Constance on a Thursday afternoon, told her I had a seminar. She was direct, efficient, and did not waste my time. She told me exactly what I needed to know about Ohio divorce law, what was likely protected as separate property, what wasn't, and what documentation would make the difference. My mother had passed 2 years earlier and left me the house on Claremont Street, the house I had grown up in. I had been renting it out. Constance confirmed that inherited property, kept in my name alone, with rental income deposited into a separate account I had maintained in my name only, was almost certainly protected. I had done that part right without knowing I would ever need to. I felt something then. Not relief exactly, more like the floor was solid under me even though the walls were still coming down. Constance told me the filing process, the timeline, what to expect. She told me not to change my behavior noticeably until we were ready to file. I told her I understood. I went home and made dinner. The thing about living with a secret is that it changes the texture of every conversation, not in an obvious way, in a very quiet way, like the difference between lake water and river water. It looks the same from the surface, but everything is moving underneath. Cecile talked about repainting the dining room. She had found a color she liked, a warm gray. She showed me a paint chip. I looked at it and said it was nice. She talked about Natalie and Joel coming over for dinner the following Sunday. She said Joel had mentioned wanting to watch the game. I said that sounded good. Joel came over that Sunday. He grilled burgers in my backyard on my grill. He used my spatula. He laughed at his own jokes the way he always did. He put his arm around my daughter's shoulders and I watched my daughter lean into him, trusting and easy, the way you do with someone you believe in completely. That was the worst part. Not the anger at Cecile and Joel. The dread of what was coming for Natalie. She was 29. She worked as an occupational therapist at a pediatric clinic. She loved true crime podcasts and terrible reality television, and she always remembered to ask how my knee was doing after my surgery 2 years ago. She called every Sunday. She was a good person. She did not know. I was certain of that. Her face that evening was entirely unguarded, happy, a little tired from her week, joking with her mother about a recipe they were both trying to master. There was not a trace of performance in her. That certainty hurt in a different way than everything else. I had been in the recording business long enough, the business of recording client calls, to know that you need to be patient and deliberate. So I was. 3.5 weeks after I found the video, everything was in order. Constance had the filing ready. The thumb drive was documented and copied. Warren knew the broad outlines. I had moved a portion of my personal funds to my individual account, which Constance had told me was fully appropriate given the circumstances. On a Wednesday morning, I told Cecile I had a property walkthrough in Dublin and would be gone until at least 2. She nodded without looking up from her phone. I drove to Warren's house instead. At 12:40, my phone buzzed. It was the alert from the Ring doorbell camera I had installed at the front door 3 weeks earlier, another thing Joel had suggested I do some months ago for home security. He had been very helpful with my technology setup. The irony was not lost on me. The camera showed Joel's truck pulling into my driveway. I had the recording device in my shirt pocket, and I was sitting in Warren's kitchen 40 minutes away. I wasn't there. But the camera was. I watched the footage that evening from Constance's office, where I had gone directly after Warren's. Front door, garage side door, clear, time-stamped, unambiguous. Combined with the cloud backup videos, Constance said we had more than we needed. She filed the following morning. Cecile was served on a Friday afternoon. I had asked Warren to be at the house when it happened, not to intervene, just to be a witness to the moment and to make sure things stayed calm. He called me afterward. He said she had gone very quiet, accepted the envelope, closed the door. That was it. I did not go home that night. I stayed at Warren's. She called 4 times. I did not answer. I texted her once. I know everything. My attorney's contact information is in the paperwork. Please communicate through her. Joe called at 8:42 that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He left no message. What I had not fully prepared for was Natalie. She called me at 9:15 and her voice was, I don't have a better word than shattered. She had found out not from me, not from Cecile, but because Joel had come home and told her something had happened, using a version of events that conveniently placed him as something between a confused bystander and a minor participant. He had apparently suggested that Cecile had pursued him, that it had only happened a few times, that he'd been trying to end it. I have been in enough negotiations to know a managed narrative when I hear one. I told Natalie I was sorry she was finding out this way. I told her it was real and it had been going on for months, that I could document. I told her I had the evidence, and it was clear and she could see it if she chose to, but I would not force that on her. She was crying in a way I had not heard since she was small. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I needed to know everything before I did anything, and because I love you and I didn't want you to have to carry this 1 second longer than necessary." She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I feel so stupid." I said, "Don't. He deceived you the same way he deceived me. Being trusting is not stupidity. It's just what you do when you love someone." She didn't say anything for a while after that. Neither did I. We just stayed on the phone together in the quiet. The divorce process in Ohio takes a minimum of 30 days from filing to final hearing if uncontested. Ours was not uncontested. Cecile had retained an attorney, a man named Howard, according to Constance, and the initial position from Howard's office was, to use Constance's diplomatic phrasing, aggressive. There were claims about the rental income from the Claremont property being a marital asset because I had allegedly used some of it for joint household expenses over the years. There were questions raised about the value of my broker's business. There were requests for documentation going back 7 years. I had documentation going back 9 years. I had kept records the way my father had taught me to keep records, in labeled folders in a fireproof box, because he had been audited once in 1987 and never forgot it. I am grateful to him for that lesson every single day. Constance was not rattled. She said the Claremont property position was unlikely to prevail given the paper trail. The business valuation was a fair point of negotiation. We would proceed methodically. Methodicy was the right word for what followed. 11 weeks of back and forth, documentation requests, 2 mediation sessions, and a final settlement conference that lasted most of a Thursday. I sat across a table from Cecile for the first time since the papers were filed. She looked at me once, at the beginning. Then she looked at her hands for most of the rest of it. I thought about 31 years. I thought about our first apartment on Henderson Road, the one where the radiator knocked all winter long. I thought about the night Natalie was born and how I had held her in the hospital parking garage because Cecile had fallen asleep and I wanted to look at her under the lights without waking anyone. I thought about a lot of things. Then I signed where Constance told me to sign. The Claremont property stayed mine. My broker's business was valued and a modest settlement amount was agreed upon. The marital home, which we had owned jointly, was to be sold and proceeds split. That one stung. I had liked that house, but I signed, and it was done. And I walked out into a November afternoon that was cold and bright and absolutely indifferent to everything that had just happened, the way November afternoons tend to be. Joel and Natalie's situation was, of course, its own separate devastation. She had asked him to leave within 2 weeks of everything coming out. He had gone to stay with a friend, and from what Natalie told me, he had attempted a period of apology and reconciliation efforts that she described as too little, about 6 months too late. She filed her own divorce paperwork in January. I was not glad about her pain. I want to be clear about that. I would have carried the whole thing myself if it had been possible, if that had been an option. Just absorb it and let her keep the life she had built with someone she thought she knew. But that had never been an option. The only variable was when she found out, not whether. She came to stay with me for a long weekend in February, after I had moved into a rental on the east side while the house was on the market. We watched bad television. She brought a casserole from a recipe she had been working on. It was good. We argued gently about whether the Cincinnati Bengals had any real shot at the playoffs. She accused me of being unreasonably optimistic. I told her it was a constitutional right. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her really laugh since October. The house sold in March. I had been in real estate long enough to know it would, good birds, good neighborhood, good timing with the spring market. I watched it go from the car when the lockbox was being removed, which is a strange thing to do, I know. But I needed to see it from the outside one more time. 22 years in that house. Natalie had learned to ride her bike in that driveway. I did not stay long. There was no point. What I want to say now, and I mean this as plainly as I can, is that the version of my life that was ending when I found that video was not actually the life I thought it was. I had been living inside a story that had a different plot than the one I was reading. That is a disorienting thing to understand. It takes time. It is not a light switch. But there is something that becomes clear. Slowly, over the months that follow something like this, the grief is real, and so is the relief. Both things can be true. I understand this now, accommodating a loneliness inside my marriage that I had been treating as just a normal feature of middle age. The distance between Cecile and me that I had been chalking up to familiarity, to busy schedules, to just being 58. It had not been those things. Or not only those things, and once I stopped pretending otherwise, the air was different. I took that trip to Asheville I had been looking at photos of. Went alone, hiked part of the mountains to Sea Trail, ate dinner at a restaurant bar 2 nights in a row, and talked to strangers about things that did not matter, which turns out to be an excellent use of an evening. I came back feeling like myself in a way I had not felt in longer than I could accurately measure. My brother Warren and I have started going to Bengals games together. We went twice last season. He brings a thermos of coffee that is mostly not coffee, and I don't ask questions. We argue about the offensive line for 3 hours, and it is genuinely among the best time I spend. Natalie is doing well. Better than well. She transferred to a clinic closer to downtown, got a promotion she had been working toward for 2 years, and started doing a ceramics class on Thursday evenings that she is enthusiastic about in the way she gets enthusiastic about things, which is completely and loudly and with full conviction. She texts me photos of the bowls she makes. They are lopsided and she is deeply proud of them. I have 2 on my kitchen shelf. She does not talk about Joel often. When she does, it's with a flatness that tells me she has done the work of processing it as much as she wants to, and that the remaining distance is chosen and not painful. She is a resilient person. She always has been. Last month she called on a Sunday, the way she always does, and she said something near the end of the call that I keep coming back to. She said, "Dad, I'm glad you handled it the way you did. I know it was hard for you to wait before telling me, but I think if you'd come to me first when you were still in the middle of it, I don't know if I would have believed you. I might have defended him. I might have made it harder." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, "I didn't want you to be in the middle of it at all." She said, "I know. That's what I mean." I didn't entirely understand what she meant by that, or maybe I did and just needed to sit with it. Either way, I've been sitting with it. That call came from a person who has come through something and is standing on the other side of it with her eyes open, and that matters more to me than I have words for. I am 59 now. I am selling more commercial property than residential these days, which suits me. I was always better with numbers than with staging living rooms. I renewed my broker's license without incident. I have a good accountant and a better attorney and a brother who shows up when it counts. I think about trust differently than I used to, not with bitterness. I want to be specific about that. More with clarity. Trust is not a permanent condition you establish and then maintain on autopilot. It needs actual tending. I did not tend mine. I assumed. That is not entirely on me, but I can own my part of it without letting it become the whole story. The whole story is longer than any one part of it. I still have the coffee mug I used the morning I found the video. 43 seconds that ended one life and began, eventually, another. I use the mug every day, not as some kind of deliberate symbol, just because it's a good mug. The cardinal is still in the oak tree too, as far as I can tell. Or maybe it's a different cardinal. I don't know how long cardinals stay in one place. Either way, it's good to have something red and certain sitting in the yard. I've thought a lot about the 43 seconds that changed everything. Not with anger anymore. That part faded faster than I expected. More with a kind of quiet clarity, the way you see a road more honestly after you've driven it in both directions. Here is what I believe, and I believe it without any framework handed to me by anyone else. The choices people make accumulate. They don't disappear. Cecile and Joel made choices, small ones and large ones, over months, and every single one of them compounded. Not because the universe was keeping score, because that's simply how actions work. They leave evidence. They shift weight, they create pressure that eventually has to go somewhere. I didn't need to manufacture consequences. I only needed to manufacture consequences. I only needed to be patient enough to document what was already true. That patience was the hardest thing I've ever practiced. Sitting across the dinner table from Joel while he used my spatula and laughed at his own jokes. That took something I didn't know I had. But here is what I learned from it. Restraint is not weakness. Restraint, when it comes from clarity rather than fear, is one of the most intelligent things a person can do. I had one chance to get it right. I took the time to understand what right actually meant before I moved. The intelligence I'm talking about isn't the kind you're born with, or the kind that shows up on any test. It's the kind you build by forcing yourself to slow down when everything in you wants to react. It's asking, what do I actually know versus what am I assuming? It's the difference between a decision and a reaction. I had spent 31 years reacting to Cecile's moods, to the distance between us, to the quiet that I told myself was just familiarity. When it finally mattered, I stopped reacting and started thinking. That shift saved me in ways I'm still understanding. And Natalie. That conversation in February when she said she was glad I'd handled it the way I did, I carry that with me. Because the temptation, when you're in pain, is to share it immediately, to not be alone in it. But sometimes the most protective thing you can do for the people you love is to be alone in something long enough to understand it fully before you hand it to them. She needed to see the evidence clearly. She needed the truth to be undeniable. If I had come to her in the first raw hour, she might have defended him. The story might have gotten muddled. Instead, she received something solid, and she was able to make clean decisions from it. That is what I owe her, not just honesty, but honesty at the right time, in the right form. I am not the same person I was the morning I found that video. I don't think I could go back to that person even if I wanted to, and I don't want to. He was a man who had stopped tending to things that needed tending, who had confused familiarity with contentment, who had been generous in the wrong directions for a long time. The man I am now keeps better records, pays closer attention, knows the difference between trust that's been earned and trust that's just never been tested. Natalie's lopsided bowls are still on my shelf. The cardinal is still in the oak tree, and I take none of it for granted anymore.